A very good evening to you all, and welcome to the 38th edition of this logbook, Forbidden Zone, which is of some interest given the information we're about to share. We've had a period of apparent rest, except for the latest tally we have and the deaths that continue to occur, as you know, following the process, I was going to say infectious, the poisoning of the whole of society, of all human beings. But unfortunately, we're going to have to live through, they're going to make us live through, a time that will start tentatively with apparent energy restrictions and will likely culminate by combining it with a pre-pandemic scenario, making use of the famous origin of the flying bug and its respective mutations or variants. Obviously, I say all this with irony. Well, to encapsulate the population, ration them in some way, and of course confine them, which is the ultimate goal they have. We've been warning and alerting you about this for practically the last few years. It's not for human beings, no matter how many explanations they give, with far-fetched explanations like the war or the Strait of Hormuz, geopolitical issues. None of those explanations are real or based on the reality of what they want. And when I say they, I mean a non-human component, obviously, that seeks everything for its own benefit and therefore to the detriment of all human beings, as they've also been doing since ancient times. Today we're going to divide the program into two blocks, but first I want to mention something. Normally comments appear in the chat sometimes. I can't hear the audio, I have no sound, or the audio has no sound, or the video in question, and this happened in program 37. I thought it was just one person or a follower in isolation, but there's been a recurring pattern from several people in the chat claiming they haven't been able to or can't view the content with the audio. Of course, obviously I can't ask the question here if it's happened to you, because I understand you may or may not be hearing me now. It's likely that the YouTube platform itself is restricting it in certain countries in a specific way, probably based on the content provided here. That's why we always ask you to give a like to help boost the content, this type of content on the web and its proliferation, and to bypass to some extent, which is practically impossible, the algorithm in this case, which is obviously against us. As I say, today we're going to share a program with two main topics, which would be part of the logbook, where we're going to talk about how they're starting tentatively in all parts of the world, not just in Europe, which is what affects us from here, let's say the country of origin where I'm broadcasting from, but I'm aware that people are listening to us in other parts of the planet, and unfortunately they'll suffer the same fate in that sense. That is to say, they're going to apply the concept that all of that is global, just as they did with what they called COVID and so on. Obviously, the sole reason for applying a protocol to the whole of humanity, regardless of where they are, is simply because there's an intelligent, thinking mind directing all human beings. And here, those people who think there's some degree of autonomy and power in certain world powers or nations completely lose their argument. All of them, evidently, are being directed by the same one. And every time an event of this nature occurs, or they make us live through a scenario of this type, like the one they're about to make us live through now, it increasingly calls into question those who postulate that the world is actually run by Trump, or China, or powers in the geopolitical sphere. And of course, it's more emphasized and becomes much clearer that there's a single thinking mind directing the whole world and controlling our entire civilization. A mind working to the detriment of all ordinary human beings who are the ones who'll suffer those consequences, which were already suffering in some way, but now they're stepping on the accelerator again. And in the second part of the program, which we'll frame in the Forbidden Zone, we're going to talk again about that apocalyptic figure, the figure of the Antichrist, and who some of them are. According to the official news they themselves have released, in a rather brazen manner, where they mention the famous Detachment 201, referring to the fact that the Trump administration has now appointed 4 individuals, top CEOs from various tech companies related to the field of artificial intelligence. They've been set up, or rather, they've been chosen as lieutenant colonels, a high military rank, when they don't even have, well, any training or indoctrination in the military field. A career and a rank that normally takes an average of 20 years, depending on the skills and merits a person can develop within the military sphere. This gives us a lot to talk about because we're going to study some of the profiles specifically presented for Lieutenant Colonel and companies like Palantir, one from OpenAI, a co-founder of Meta. We're going to do an analysis on this and the fuss that some people have made, it seems, about all of this. Because, furthermore, some of them speak openly about the Antichrist. They're even doing, for example, the case of Peter Thiel, who's practically the owner of Palantir. He's giving conferences, acting as a speaker, and giving speeches about the coming of the Antichrist and how we can somehow, I think in reality, he's trying to embody him. All of this is, we're going to see it, we're going to study it, and let everyone draw their own conclusions. But evidently, turbulent times are ahead, to say the least. However, I say again, it's not that we were even in an environment of relative peace, because of everything we've been dragging along, everything we've been living through, and being aware of where we really live. But they're turning the screw once more. They're accelerating their agenda again, and they're adjusting to biblical times, in the sense of their own agenda. Let's start with today's program, which, as I say, is very interesting. We're going to see what measures we can take or what we can do at an individual and collective level, and be prepared above all for the scenarios they're already presenting to us. It's not something that here we're obviously going to interpret all this in a different key to how the far-fetched arguments they might give in the official version have been doing. We know what the underlying issue is and who it is that carries out this type of activity, to the detriment of human beings, but obviously we can do something and we must be prepared for it. We'll do it. Meanwhile, you take a seat, feel at home as usual here at the 5th column, and we'll do it right after this introductory minute of this bumper. Well, yesterday, I think I recall, I sent a Telegram audio linking the scenario that, as I say, they're going to make us live through. It's important to stress and emphasize that phrase, they're going to make us live through. It's nothing spontaneous or down to chance or some kind of measure we must adopt from a collective point of view, in this case European or global, to, with the use of energy restrictions, move forward as a largely reinforced humanity. Quite the opposite, obviously. And that suspicion you have more than sufficiently worked on, and you're aware that there's a malignant and chaotic mind behind everything they're doing to us human beings, right? I mentioned that from roughly logbook number 10 through to 14, a series of concepts were being studied and analysed. One of those was zero electromagnetic noise. The intent to do all of this in a state of absolute stealth, specifically using the word stealth. Stealth in the sense of silence, and when we talk about electromagnetic silence, we mean that in order to send clear signals, in this case to human biology, using technology or nanotechnology, with that key component you know so well, which has been previously implanted and continues to be implanted in the entire global population, you know how it's the main route to be able to send a clear signal in the high frequency range, specifically terahertz, 26 gigahertz, sorry, and to catalyze all that technology inside the human body towards a final hybridization process, although it's already happening, we need, or rather they need, I don't want to be part of it, an environment or a setting where electromagnetic noise is minimal or even zero. So they are faced with two basic problems here. First, that we live in a total maelstrom, a planetary electromagnetic soup, where we can hardly escape that noise. Because if you were to put an oscillator here, an oscilloscope to see all the frequencies being emitted right now, well, we have those from the electrical voltage, the computer, the printer, the light bulb, high voltage devices. We have, for example, the Bluetooth cabling or the wireless Bluetooth network surrounding us right now, and of course mobile phones, radio waves, television waves, and so on. That's a problem they face, because if you want to send a clear, legible signal that can be interpreted in electronic terms, you need to shield the rest. And in a world like the current one, the electromagnetic soup is extremely high. On the other hand, there is a source of even greater electromagnetic noise, which is the one emitted by our own sun, regardless of whether it's much further away or closer, for the flat earthers and so on. We won't get into that. The sun emits a massive source of electromagnetic radiation across almost all magnitudes of the spectrum, and obviously we can't shield the sun. Although there have been some attempts, funnily enough, by Mr. Gates with that project to continuously bombard the atmosphere with calcium carbonate, as they have suggested, to form clouds so that sunlight is effectively shielded and doesn't reach our, let's say, ground level. But for this, they do have a window, a very narrow window of time, an opportunity, which is the highly anticipated solar eclipse on the 12th day of August. And would you believe it? Obviously, when there is an eclipse, there is a window of between 8 and 15 minutes approximately, where that natural source of solar electromagnetic noise is naturally shielded, which is the precise and optimal time to send that clear signal to biology. Taking into account those two variables, which in some way are controllable, one, from what we are seeing with energy restrictions, which start tentatively, remember what they did in the pandemic scenario in 2020, 2021. They started very gradually, first 1 week, then 3 months. Then there was no lockdown, the president told us. And they ended up, well, just look how we are still living with the consequences, which will last forever and will end convergently in the extinction of the human race. I am saying it as it is, and they will end with the extinction of the human race, which is where we are headed. Very few human beings will actually be filtered and will emerge, let us say, victorious from this massive filtering operation, from this school test that all of humanity is being put through. And the other, let us say, the other factor that they apparently do not control, turning off the sun, well, would you believe it? Naturally, it can indeed be turned off, even if only momentarily, by taking advantage of the eclipse event. And here you now have to understand why, since ancient times, since ancestral times, humanity has always feared the issue of bad omens associated with the lack of sun, or in this case, with eclipses. All of this makes us see absolutely everything with a different perspective and a different lens now once we introduce the E factor into our lives, or rather into the model of civilization that they themselves have given us precisely. This was the clarification I wanted to make, and many more details were seen in depth, whiteboard in hand precisely, from program number 10 up to 14 or 15. We talked about the whole concept of zero electromagnetic noise. And unfortunately, what we are seeing seems like everything is converging towards that. Because also, in summer, they are already talking, would you believe it? They are talking about a spike in the famous cicada variant, as they call it now, or Arcturus for the summer. And someone might say, look, normally it has always been attributed. The term viral, precisely in the virological field, to the cold, right? From October, November, December, at least, let us say, in our hemisphere, like seasonal flu and so on. However, they're actually going to possess the absolute gall, the shamelessness and the audacity to present a spike that is going to primarily and significantly impact children. They tell us, logically, those who are the most heavily vaccinated, not just with the new ones, but with those already on the schedule throughout the upcoming summer months. A clearly abnormal situation from the perspective of what they themselves call pyrological science, which obviously falls apart because we know that the damage is precisely due to electromagnetic pollution effects catalyzed by components previously introduced here based on a material you know very well. So the perfect scenario for them is indeed going to unfold, obviously. I'm speaking in their terms, so you understand what I mean. Practically zero electromagnetic noise, combined with the eclipse, they'll cause blackouts. I'm almost certain the day will come, in just a few weeks, when they tell us they're going to switch things off. In fact, they're already dropping hints in the European Parliament itself right now, while we're talking about this. And they entertain you with news that we've apparently gone to the moon for a second time and so on. Or the corruption cases involving Sanchez and Bigona, they're considering literally cutting off the power supply services, in this case, and electricity, for several hours a day. Unfortunately, they're going to do all of that. And what now seems like madness, which I'm suggesting here, though it doesn't seem so mad now, they're hinting at it themselves in the media, might have seemed crazy in live stream 10 when I first said it, but now we're unfortunately going to see it, and worse still, we'll feel it, not just in our pockets, though that too, but in our lives. The cicada variant, like our friend Cigara, exactly. We're going to look at some news and videos so you can get an idea of the amount of information they're making viral themselves in this regard, related to the fact, to convince you, even statements from the president, elected or not, but president, where he literally washed his hands like Pilate and tells us all this is a consequence of the Strait of Hormuz and the war, an illegal war. The debate here is whether the war is illegal or not, but what wars are legal or illegal anyway? If war itself is a conflict where two nations apparently face off, but the problem isn't just that they're facing off, and it's not just two of them either. It's a grouping that will end up dragging us all in, because now we have a new situation where Russia says it's threatening Spain or the Spanish people, the humans living here, because we're helping to build drones. And I'm asking here in the chat, are any of you making a drone to annoy Putin in Russia? I bet not. I bet this isn't even in our hands, nor does it affect us directly, does it? Well, the boldness and, as I say, the shit cheek with which the media are speaking, taking it for granted that we're going to live through all this. It's literally revolting. Even for us, who were already aware of the world we live in and could expect just about anything. But we still, at least I do, haven't got used to having to go through all of this. How can we protect ourselves? We're going to talk a bit about that, Maria Jose. We'll probably do a Q&A session in the next program where you can join in, and let's see if together we can come up with solutions based on what's coming our way now. There are people buying electric bikes, which, by the way, have gone up in price. They're sky high. But when you have the electric bike and you can get around on it because they can't say anything to you, they'll come up with something else. They'll say you can't move because there's a variant circulating. But we're going to have to move, obviously. I'm going to drop an information pill, which is what they call it now at the university where I've re-enrolled. Start looking for information about so-called spark gap generators. They're very easy to build, of course. They're illegal from an official standpoint. Now we can see why. And in a way, it's a very simple device to build. It involves high voltage. So this is for those of you who have deep knowledge of electricity and electronics. And what it basically does is emit pulses across the entire electromagnetic spectrum that are especially high, using batteries and small high voltage transformers. You don't need much more, but they can be built very easily. Maybe at some point in time, especially near the date of the 12th of August, we'll have to make use of them. It would be like a frequency jammer, which you know is precisely about sending out a signal that shields the rest because of its power. And obviously, they're also prohibited by law. But what it actually does is ensure that those signals they want to send, those tests, don't reach the biology clearly enough. And you already know what I'm talking about. We went into much more depth in Program 12, I believe, regarding the construction of sigils from a nanotechnological perspective. But I don't want to get into too many technical details or go too deep, because all of this is very easy to understand. Let's start by looking at some news that they are, in a way, publishing as mouthpieces in their media outlets. The first one is, for example, the one that literally affects us in Europe. Here appears this demon, or demoness, as you might want to call it. Devil, she-devil. I'm using the inclusive language that's so fashionable now. This demon, basically, occupying high positions in the European Union or the European Commission with decision-making power where nobody has voted for her, and apparently all member states, including us Spaniards, have to follow her directives, her protocols and her orders. Obviously, she's taking orders from someone else. Brussels proposes, that's how they started, 1 day of mandatory remote work, here we go, per week to curb the effects of the crisis caused by the war in Iran. The European Commission will present a package of measures to European leaders next week. And you might say, well, if it's just 1 day of working from home, it's no big deal, right? Nowadays, training isn't strictly face-to-face. I mean, there's e-learning, there's obviously everything. There's been measures introduced gradually to lead us to this situation, and it'll culminate, as you've rightly said in the chat, in the famous 15-minute smart city, which will surely be one of the solutions it will provide, and which, would you believe it, has already been put forward a bit earlier. Remember the process: problem, reaction, solution. The solution will coincide exactly, or will provide, well, if you'll excuse the redundancy, the solution to the problem. They pose a problem that's fictitious in this sense, obviously, although that doesn't mean there isn't a massacre of human beings in the context of the war or the armed conflict. And the solution involves exactly what they had initially proposed. That is, what they wanted to do, what they had on their agenda. This is one of the news items, but for example, the executive director of the International Energy Agency, another little official, has stated that Europe has a mere 6 weeks of jet fuel left. Fatty Beerol, that's his name, claims that this is the biggest energy crisis we've ever faced. How many posts we've seen from Mr. Elon Musk in previous months, even years, saying that the main problem to be addressed in the near future is energy. Because apparently quantum computers and artificial intelligence had to be supplied with a huge amount of energy. That's what they told us. How do you say it? A sort of prophet. Right. A visionary who obviously knows the plans. It's not that he's intelligent, as many people suggest, or a visionary. He simply knows what they're going to do. And now you'll see some connections that link all of this together. All of this is global, so how does Cuba fit in? Well, a record blackout there means nearly 2/3 of the country will be without power during peak hours. Or, for example, in Venezuela, which we're going to see here now as well. Venezuela activates an electricity saving plan to reverse the blackouts. The government asks Venezuelans to reduce consumption due to the impact of the dry season on hydroelectric plants. And people wonder, well, why is this happening now? But we haven't had this apparent problem with electricity resources before. People aren't paying their electricity bills. Aren't there now? More photovoltaic farms, millions of solar panels installed, especially in Spain, for example. Isn't there much more power production, even reserves, because it can be stored? Aren't many groups contributing individually? I have friends who have panels and they're feeding into the grid. Shouldn't there be a surplus rather than a demand? What's the problem then? And why in Cuba, in Venezuela, in India, or in Europe? Is the same protocol going to be followed, apparently, because of what affects us there? Isn't it only 20%, they tell us with their arguments about the product and oil that somehow settled in that area called the Strait of Hormuz? And as for the 80%, why not just increase demand elsewhere and that's it? Isn't there so much oil in Venezuela? But what is the problem then? You see how, really, there's no logical, rational cause behind it. You just have to believe it, like the TV believers do, in a passive attitude when they sit right in front of the television and swallow this whole format. Let's watch some videos about it so you can get an idea of where they want to lead us. And don't think this is going to be something spontaneous that will last a very short time. This is here to stay, as they told us about the other thing. It's here to stay, they told us. You'll remember, COVID is here to stay. Forget the old normal. We're in the new normal now, and we're not going back to the old world. Well, this is also here to stay. The first thing we have is the Prime Minister, whether you like it or not, saying that it's not my fault, that this is the fault or consequence of the war. This is an argument he literally uses to try and convince the majority, as I say, of telebelievers, the stupid population who aren't even human beings. Not the voters or non-voters, but let's say the general public.
Of the economic consequences of this war. But I think it's important for citizens to be aware that what is happening to their pockets, or might happen, has nothing to do with the decisions taken by the Spanish government.
Exactly. In fact, the only thing Sanchez has done on an international geopolitical level is say, let's create a European army. In other words, adding more fuel to the fire. More fuel to the fire, quite literally. Do you see how he addresses the citizens' mindset directly to tell them, hey, I have nothing to do with this. It's the war's fault.
However, with a war that is unlawful and illegal,
of course,
and that'll bring a lot of fallout in the form of pain, suffering and instability in an already very unstable region, and that, consequently, we're going to have to, well, indeed, all pay for it together.
You'll pay very little, it'll barely affect her. From an economic point of view and so on, it'll barely affect you.
In order to be able to defend and compensate sectors that are victims of the entirety of this conflict, which, I repeat, we don't exactly know the objective of either.
Oh, we do know, and you do too, obviously. You're doing the job of, as I say, convincing people, of giving a far-fetched explanation to the majority of fools, whether they vote for you or not, but who might believe that all this is the economic consequence arising from the war in the Hormuz area.
Nor do we know precisely just how long a period of time it will last.
Like the lockdowns, which were supposed to be 3 weeks and then turned into more. Do you see how it's a pamphlet, literally a commercial to convince the citizen that everything we're going through comes from there, that it's their fault? Everything we're going through and will go through, because he's already telling you it's going to get worse. Let's watch another video.
Good afternoon, everyone. Tuesday, the 14th of April. How sad that we have to find out from French colleagues what the political parties are voting for in the European Parliament. From Spain. None of them are currently informing us about what they're preparing for us, ladies and gentlemen. French colleagues inform me that they're voting in the European Parliament on a possible energy lockdown. Do you remember last summer, the European Union country that did the blackout experiment? Well, it was Spain, because as it's the country that owes the most money in the whole European Union, well, it was Spain that had to back down and carry out the blackout. Now, with this experiment they're going to try with the energy lockdown, well, we'll be the ones.
This isn't an experiment, Jan. Just like what they called COVID wasn't a social experiment. That's an interpretation that some have been able to make to measure at what point, what rate, let's say, of sampling or what interactivity there would be directly with human beings in the sense of whether they're reluctant, hesitant or not. But the real objective was an objective of implementation. The COVID era was an era of implementation. And now comes, unfortunately, the era of hybridization.
The Spanish are also the first to try the experiment. Is there any opposition political party that's informing us? No, ladies and gentlemen, because right now all the political parties...
They're all the same. All the political parties answer to the same master. That lady doesn't know that.
Those in Spain have focused on the Andalusian elections. That's what they want from us. The more seats they get, the more deputies they get, the closer they are to the pot to keep stealing from us. That's what they're interested in. Looking out for us. Zero. We know that from the European Union, from the Agriculture Commission, which I've already made a video about. We know that 200 million euros were released for livestock farmers affected by wolf attacks. Just recently, in March, in the Congress of Deputies, they voted on 80 emergency measures, also because of the war, which when it's not the war in Afghanistan, it's the one in Ukraine, and when not Iran, and when not, they invent it themselves. The Spanish Prime Minister has decided that those 200 million coming for the livestock farmers affected by wolf attacks, he's given them to energy cars. Has the opposition said anything? No. They've all kept quiet like bloody cowards. As a Valencian, I'm fuming, absolutely livid, because 30 million euros that the government has collected from all Spaniards as aid for Valencians affected by the floods that they caused us.
Affected by the floods, well, that they caused us. Directly and significantly affected by the opening of dam floodgates in a deliberate and intentional manner.
Those 30 million euros have disappeared from the national scene. They can't explain where that money has gone. But is there any political party in Spain that dares to ask the Prime Minister where those 30 million intended for the Valencians are? Nah.
But, well, as he's dodging the issue, regardless of all that, obviously, how could there be? Since they're all paid by the same person. I want to remind you that an association, which I won't name, but I still have the WhatsApp message here, approached the fifth column, specifically me, and I replied very politely via audio, where I was proposed, just so you know, at the same time as Alves, I was proposed with the apparent votes of the fifth column and that other quite large platform as a candidate for the European Parliament. Obviously, I've said time and again that the day you see me involved in politics, including local politics, which could be very decent, meaning I'm going to work for my town, which I've also been proposed, you take Ricardo Delgado directly and at the very least you question him. Because, as a matter of principle, I've said that the moment you see me involved in politics, the decisions I make, even if they might seem good for the community, are mediated, literally intermediated by a higher power. And until now, I want to maintain the freedom to say and do whatever I please. Don't let anyone tell you what you have to do. Be autonomous with your mistakes, with your flaws, and with your virtues and your gifts. Let them not be augmented, but with your gifts. Remember what I've told you at this moment. Let's see another video about it. Energy lockdowns.
Energy lockdowns? Working from home, not for health, but for petrol? Turning off the lights? Closing petrol stations at 10 at night?
Well, it wasn't for health either. That's what they told us. You believe the first argument. Now, you're not buying the second one. We didn't even buy the first one. And not buying, all the crap and all the misinformation they gave us at the beginning led us precisely to analyse one of those, to use the technical services of a university, to use the academic freedom of a senior lecturer from a university you know very well, and to produce two reports, a provisional one and a final technical report with the detection of that material you know very well, precisely in what they call vaccines. Later, in other parts of the world, well, high-end optical microscopes were acquired, as you know. We even did live scientific analyses. I did one with nearly 400 people, including a large number of medical doctors in Seville, where we rented out a very expensive hall in La Cartuja, precisely to show everyone what was there live on a 24 square meter screen. I'll keep it in mind, because it seems like every single bit of this is being forgotten.
Yes, banning travel and limiting consumption. If 5 years ago they'd told me that this was going to happen, I would have said it's science fiction.
He's using the same phrase I said the other day. It seems to me that more people are watching us than we think.
The latest news that has come out in the last 24 to 48 hours. Vietnam and Thailand, the testing ground for what will be implemented later on a global level. We saw it a few months ago when they froze 83 million accounts for customers who hadn't identified themselves biometrically. And now we see it with other things, suddenly a kind of deja vu of the year 2020. Today we're going to talk about something uncomfortable, not just the war, not just oil, we're also going to talk about agendas, because every crisis has two sides, control and opportunities.
This isn't, they don't do this because some people who are still too instrumentalized in today's world, or what they really call today's world, the official version, think that they can do all this with an economic motive. That doesn't mean that there aren't secondary actors here who are going to literally make a killing, as they might have done with the face masks and so on. In other words, they use money to a certain extent to buy influence, but the real origin of why they do this isn't economic, you see? Get that into your heads. They don't do this for the economy. They do this because they serve the based, literally, and it suits the based. All the options for reducing mobility are ultimately processed or converge to one point: stay at home.
Vietnam is asking companies to implement working from home to reduce fuel consumption.
Vietnam and Thailand. Just look at how wonderful that is. This is the concept of globalization. Globalization comes in some way, well, to cover up the presence of the control factor over all civilizations.
It's gone up by 32%, diesel by 56%, and kerosene by more than 80%. We're seeing queues at petrol stations, not just in Vietnam, but in many countries across Asia. And the government is asking people not to speculate. Thailand is ordering its civil servants to work from home, international travel to be suspended, and air conditioning not to go below 26 or 27 degrees.
In such distinct and apparently different parts of the world, the same thing is being done. How is this possible? All countries have lost a bit of their identity and their autonomy and are following similar policies.
Petrol stations have to be closed from 10 o'clock at night. Lights must be turned off and electricity reduced. And not only that, but they're also promoting carpooling.
Lights must be turned off and electricity reduced. In other words, we're heading towards a trend of limiting electromagnetic noise. I told you in program number 10, and unfortunately, once again, I wasn't wrong.
This is something. These are all quote-unquote temporary measures. They're always temporary, but they're never reversible. But the problem is that oil isn't just petrol. It's the basis for 90% of synthetic medicines used in pharmaceutical logistics, active ingredients and medical plastics. It's also key in nitrogenous fertilizers. It's the base for plastic in food packaging, in global shipping, in synthetic textile production, in cleaning products, and electricity generation in many countries. And generally in the cold chain. When Hormuz is blocked, it's not just oil that goes up, the price of bread goes up too.
Well, this one comes to argue and justify to you that this won't just affect energy, but even food and everything that literally reaches our hands. Right, because oil, let's just say they've made everything based on oil. Even food, obviously. Let's watch another video. Here they're talking about rationing.
It set off the alarms and warns, prepare for energy rationing and speed limits. And look, when they tell you it's for your safety, start trembling. 4 years.
Or for your own good. It's for your safety, eh? To prevent things.
The problem was Russian gas. Today it's oil. If the United States and the Gulf set the rules, and we're depending on them again, someone has to pay for the party. That's why Brussels is activating its emergency list. Watch out! Lowering motorway speeds by 10 kilometers per hour, imposing remote work whenever possible.
That's to catch you out with hefty fines, obviously, because it's already challenging enough as it is to maintain speed in specific sections, as you have to pay far more attention to the instrument dial and speedometer than on external conditions that could cause an accident.
Alternating cars in cities by number plate, avoiding flights where possible, carpooling or using public transport. This is because Europe imports over 40% of its diesel and kerosene from the United States.
That's the reason. That her logic wants to interpret. In a way, she's making her arguments based on the wrong foundations. That is, thinking of an apparently rational world where they sell you economic and geopolitical arguments and so on. But what we say from here, from the fifth column, is that none of this has anything to do with it. Everything is understood much better from a single thinking head. A beast, as you've rightly said over there. Let's see the last video talking about what they call energy restrictions.
Yes, energy expert. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
What the Commission proposes.
A young energy expert, then. He's got bags of energy at his age, but storing all that info is the hard part.
The EU considers rationing.
They're putting all this out to justify it.
Right? Or a more sustainable use of energy resources. I mean, at a domestic level, you know, in our owns.
Well, I think it's a rationing system where they start with a recommendation. So in that 3 to 4 hour window, citizens are advised not to consume a certain amount of energy. If the target is met, that'll be it, though I doubt it will be. But if it isn't, and we absolutely have to meet it, the only way is to have rolling blackouts for each home for short periods during those 3 or 4 hours.
Selective cuts then, not indiscriminate ones, based on whether someone consumes more or less.
Several factors might be involved. The electrical system has an automatic response known as a cut-off of non-priority supplies. It's a technical term of that nature. Ultimately, this means it's already automated, so that if there isn't enough energy, it would start cutting off non-priority supplies.
Remember these concepts, because we're going to see them and we're going to live through them.
Now, in this particular case, it can be done in 2 ways. Either alternately, for example, during those 4 hours, going house by house, which is automated, and cutting the power to one house for 10 minutes, then moving on to another. So in those 4 hours, we might only lose power for 10 or 15 minutes.
You could be in the lift and get stuck there, or you could be connected to an oxygen machine, you know, as well.
Alternatively, they could, if they wanted, set a limit of, say, 3,000 watts. Exceeding 3,000 watts, then, will trip your meter, as is already possible. But with new limits, if your meter trips, it might take 10 to 20 minutes for power to return instead of...
In other words, a rationing card. In this case, from an electrical supply perspective. A rationing card. If you exceed a certain amount, you're left without power for a while. Just another way to restrict humanity's creative capacity, isn't it? Do you all realise where we're headed? They're doing all this to normalise these concepts so that you start getting used to the idea. It's likely we'll even have to adapt our live streams to when we have power in the coming weeks or months, depending on what these people, this scum, these demons put us through.
It's instantaneous.
Well, just you wait if you've got food in the freezer or the fridge. What time slots or which 3 to 4 hour window are we talking about, Javier?
Well, I don't know exactly, but ultimately, if this is to lower the price, because remember, by reducing consumption, we're cutting out those peak usage periods during the day.
We reduce in electricity here, specifically electromagnetic noise. Keep that in mind.
The most expensive hours are usually around lunchtime and dinner time, roughly when this rationing or consumption limit would take place.
You're getting the picture, aren't you? What's coming our way? Because that's why they put it on the front page and call in so-called experts, the usual experts, who puff out their chest too, feeling important when they're called, to say a few things so people start accepting the idea that at some point their power will be cut because they put the washing machine on at 3 in the afternoon, for example. No, they won't be turning off the telly. Don't you worry, Paco, because that you'll have right there, like a loudspeaker, doing its job of educational communication. Let's watch another video. Fuel isn't going down. They say there must be cheaper public transport, and they're also proposing mandatory remote working. Mandatory for at least 1 day a week.
This image could stop being a one-off and become a weekly norm. Although there are still professions where remote working sounds like science fiction.
If I work in hospitality, and working in hospitality, remote working would be wonderful, really.
They've already got a solution set up for everything. At first it'll be 1 day, then it'll be 2, then it'll be the whole week. Then there'll have been a blackout, some problem or other.
You have to work remotely, but you can't.
There's not even any debate in some sectors.
Nor mine being a nurse.
While some can't even consider it, others see it as a clear advantage.
I work in an advertising agency, so obviously in my case and in my sector it's much more feasible. Whoever can work from home avoids crowding the streets and wasting petrol.
There you see, they always put on the token idiot. Of course they're going to give her the spotlight, aren't they? You see the scenario they're trying to lead us towards with this zero electromagnetic noise or electromagnetic noise limitation. But they're going to combine this a bit later on. And remember now when we looked at The Economist magazine and that breakdown we did by month with the 12 months of the year, around May, the injections and flying bugs appeared. Well, they were already talking about that, you know, the prologue, the preliminaries of summer. Mei Jin. Look at what's starting to emerge, cicada, like our friend Cigaro. A new COVID variant could surge with the arrival of summer, of course. Everyone here, I think, even the virologists who believe their official version of contagion, are holding their heads in their hands, saying, look, in summer we've treated allergies, especially with the allergists, but talking about viruses in the heat, you'll remember those arguments they used to put forward too, where they told us that COVID incidents dropped in summer because the sun's ultraviolet radiation literally killed the virus, which we don't know how it could kill, firstly because it's an exosome, it has no capacity to cause harm, and secondly because apparently their science tells us they're on the border between life and death. This variant has been detected in at least 25 states across the country, and although it hasn't reached North Carolina yet, cases have been reported in the neighbouring state of South Carolina. And some will say, well, how have they measured the cases of the cicada variant? What do they have, her new PCR test? They're already working on all that, like the others who had it since 2017, you'll remember. Another related news item, I'm looking at this so you can see the full picture. In other words, they're going to blame the summer. On the 12th of August, precisely, regarding the eclipse that is, zero electromagnetic noise from a solar perspective, combined with the energy one, or at least a limitation, they already have all that. Now they need people to stay at home to reduce mobility. Well, with this, they achieve it completely, which is the goal, you see. COVID-19, a virus we must not forget. We cannot rule out new peaks or waves if it mutates. Medical Gazette from 2 days ago analyses the COVID situation with experts covering case severity and the importance of surveillance or vaccine safety. Experts describe the current transition phase with nuance, but agree the virus no longer has its early pandemic impact. Though we shouldn't underestimate it, it's neither harmless nor fully predictable. Look at what it says here. In the opinion of Angel Gill, Professor of Preventative Medicine and Public Health at the King Juan Carlos University, he's a professor because of what I'm about to tell you. We are in an endemic situation, that is, with a constant incidence and some seasonal spikes, like the one observed last summer, although we cannot be sure the same will happen this year. In other words, this Angel Garcia fellow already knows perfectly well that there's going to be a spike this summer. You already know how they create these spikes, how they manufacture the waves. Artificial waves, raising electromagnetic fields, people implanted with that material that is catalyzed based on the electromagnetic radiation it receives. And what do we get? Well, the cicada cases, or friend cicada, or whatever they want. With those things, what do they achieve? That you stay at home. If they don't make it mandatory by law, which they can, because already remember that in 2023, while apparently nothing was happening, they modified the law and the official state gazette so that in cases of emergency, they could force the population into measures that limited individual constitutional rights. You remember, because we've given all that information here, and we didn't give it for the sake of it. We always say, we're going to give this because at some point we'll make use of it. Well, now we're making use of it. They have this all perfectly orchestrated. In terms of timing, and while we're apparently calm now, even those of us who really know what we're living through and the world we live in, it's very hard to be calm. It's going to get much worse. That is, they're going to tighten the screw. It is very likely that the real scenario they are considering is to combine energy limitation, of course with the eclipse that fits them like a glove, zero or practically zero planetary electromagnetic noise, and zero solar electromagnetic noise, plus people in social isolation. In other words, the famous stay at home, which greatly fosters the conditions for hybridization. And of course the testing and the sending of clear signals to biology, because there is no noise, because the electromagnetic soup stops being soup. And how is it possible that they have led us to this situation? But how can anyone think that? Well, look at how they have manufactured the famous war that passed through the Strait of Hormuz. Who could have imagined it? Well, they have a lot of imagination. Machiavellian, obviously, to cause you harm. The EQC notice says I use NAC 800 for plane drops. It's different from NAC 600 or 700, so be careful. Okay, the NAC, N-acetylcysteine, 800 milligrams. It means it has a better effect, right? I see. You know, it has a mucolytic action, and above all, we use its antioxidant power, okay? Because it stimulates the production of glutathione. Let's look at one last piece of news related to all this, so you can see the degree of sadism they have and the affinity precisely for children. Children may have more probabilities. Actually, it is more probability or more possibilities. Laplace's rule is the number of possible cases divided by, the number of favourable cases divided by possible cases. I say this with knowledge of contracting the new cicada variant of COVID-19, scientists say. And why do they say it is children? Some might think, hey, well, couldn't elderly people over 65 be more vulnerable? Although we already know it was. They had the flu vaccine, they were in nursing homes, and therefore. Now we all know. Why are they going after children? Or why do they say children? Well, because children are especially the most inoculated, those who accumulate the highest type of doses of this material that will amplify the fields and that will develop the disease. But by acute radiation, not by any kind of contagion. Acute radiation enhanced by graphene. Why? Well, because they have all the vaccines on the schedule and in addition to the new ones. Look at what it says here in the propaganda video. Stop the spread of the Nimbus variant. Nimbus is the clinical name. The famous cicada. Stay at home. A new variant of COVID could cause a wave of contagions when it says this summer. Do you read it? Well, this is a clear sign that they're going to make everything converge towards the famous eclipse, meaning total limitation of the human being, not just of creative capacity, but you stay at home in conditions of social isolation. We've already seen a program on what that means for our psyche, how it affects the mind, even how it encourages the appearance of the 1,000-yard stare, which is a trait typical of parasitation and hybridization, implanted because there's apparently a variant especially focused on children who are the next generation, transhumanist as they call it, and of course with zero electromagnetic noise, both external and internal planetary. Do you see? Are we going back to stay at home? So reflect on all of this and let everyone, although we'll do a special program talking about possible countermeasures we can take individually and in small groups or collectively, well, to try to shield ourselves and come out relatively unscathed from the disaster that's looming. Because this is immediate. This is coming right now. While we are talking here and you're getting on with your lives. One at university, another at work, another going to pick up the kids from school. The only mindset they have is of a chaotic nature. They only think about creating direct chaos and generating chaos and harming human beings. But everything is directed towards a global agenda, which is the agenda of the beast. That's why the same protocols of action occur in all parts of the world, with apparent differences between nations. We're going to start now with the forbidden zone, and we're going to deal with the subject of the Antichrist and a series of characters that arise from a news item. And it's the famous Detachment 201, which curiously has the same name as Event 201, which was that pre-pandemic scenario that Mr. Bill Gates did, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation with Johns Hopkins University, and some other actor that I can't remember right now. Where 3 months before, that was the 19th of October 2019, they were setting out what we would have to do in case there was a... And lo and behold, in November 2019 of that same year, in the city of Wuhan, 5G scalar radiation is activated for the first time, and the first cases appear, logically, of acute radiation that they've passed off as a flying bug. Following inoculation through the flu vaccine, especially in care homes, of that material that catalyzes and amplifies the effects of acute radiation. And obviously the COVID symptoms are the symptoms of acute radiation, because it's not the effect of a virus, but of microwave electromagnetic radiation within biology. We're going to start, as I say, with the Forbidden Zone, and we'll deal with the whole issue of that news item and a series of lieutenant colonels who have been renamed by Mr. Trump, recently appointed, and who are going to direct the policy somewhat almost at an international level. See you in a bit. Look, before we start dealing with the subject at hand at this moment, which is typical or characteristic of the Forbidden Zone, someone here has commented on something very interesting referring to the year 2012, and here I'm going to give my personal opinion. We have the year 2020 as a starting point, like the starting gun, where the actions of humanity's own enemy, of this chaotic nature, are seen in a much more palpable way, right? That is to say, they do everything in an uncontrolled way. And there's been a kind of worldwide boldness in trampling on human beings. The year 2020 has been, in that sense, a benchmark year. But I think, and I have this intuition, as someone here has said, that the year 2012, which was apparently the end of a cycle, the famous Mayan cycle, the famous Khatoon of that 25,000-year period, I'm trying to relate it right now to the end of a cycle where these types of entities, of chaotic intelligences, had a certain degree of manifestation in our civilization, but were somehow inhibited. It's as if from a certain point in time they were given free rein. They've been released from their chains to be able to generate and cause harm, all the harm they can. From the year 2012, something changed. Late 2012, early 2013. And in fact, you'll remember, well, it was in 2009 when they talked about the swine flu thing and so on. But I cannot help but feel that that year represented a significant turning point from which all events have been developing and unfolding much more rapidly, to our detriment, obviously, and for their own benefit. We're going to start with a news item that will provide coverage for the analysis we're going to do right after. The news has been published in practically all of their media outlets. For example, the Zataka newspaper says, technological military with a wink. Well, the news is this one here. The United States has appointed lieutenant colonels, a fairly high rank, to executives from Meta, Palantir and OpenAI, that is, tech companies related to the field of communication and especially artificial intelligence. We have many questions. Will they perform consultancy tasks, but suspicions are arising everywhere? Yes, but they're lieutenant colonels, meaning they have command capability. It says here it takes a soldier 20 years to achieve that rank. Well, these people have been given it just like that. On the 13th of June 2025, 4 executives from some of the world's largest tech companies put on United States Army uniforms at the Maya Henderson barracks, a 10-minute drive from the Pentagon. After taking the oath, they were appointed lieutenant colonels in the reserve. The appointment was controversial, but it was made on the occasion of the launch of Detachment 201 again, a very special army corps dedicated exclusively to military innovation. Characters who are CEOs are mentioned here, like the one from Palantir, a certain Sham Sankar, we're going to see something about him now, Andrew Bosworth, who's CTO of Meta, Kevin Weil, who's CPO of OpenAI, and Bob McGrew, advisor to Thinking Machine Labs, Mira Murati's startup. Well, and also former head of research at OpenAI. The name of Detachment 201 is a nod, they say, to Silicon Valley because of an HTTP status code 201. These are their interpretations. This is the news story. But it's particularly striking that, to give you an example, one of these characters is this one here. Do you see anything strange in his face, in his gaze and so on? This is Alex Karp, the digital mastermind behind the migrant hunt, CEO of Palantir. He breaks with the typical image of the laid-back Silicon Valley leader. With a sober style and philosophical background, he runs one of the most powerful tech companies, Palantir, with clients like the CIA and global firms, promises order in chaos, it says. I think it's actually the other way round. Yet it's heavily criticised for using its tools in migration policies. Karp, balancing liberal ideas and controversy, embodies the tension between tech power and human rights. Someone's labelled him the Antichrist, murderer, God will do justice. He looks like the Antichrist. There's a character specifically from Palantir. They certainly do look like the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. Some people have made that interpretation as well. Indeed, a philanthropist, like the famous one in fashion, Mr. Gates, called Peter Thiel. It's this gentleman here to call him something, and he's taken his deranged lectures on the Antichrist to the Vatican. And you might ask, what does a leader of an AI tech firm like Palantir have to do with it? When in the Valencia area, the reconstruction there, do you know who they commissioned? Or who is the organizer of the reconstruction of that area? Well, Palantir, right after the DAA. So what's the connection when a CEO of an AI tech firm, also a co-founder of PayPal with Elon Musk, is giving lectures talking about the Antichrist? His monologues in Rome were described by a certain press outlet as one of the most coveted tickets in the Vatican's back garden. These days it's for a series of 4 lectures on the Antichrist. In fact, they're already comparing him to him. Palantir co-founder Peter Thiel continues to ramble about the Antichrist, and after receiving much criticism for his comments, he's now taken his lectures to Vatican City. Last year, Peter Thiel was interviewed by the New York Times, where he revealed several of his viewpoints. It covered some of his comments last year and stated that what he's building with his technology could be heralding the Antichrist and will be a tool used to control the masses. In other words, he's implying that his technology and that of artificial intelligence will be used by the Antichrist himself. Therefore, in some way, he is serving him. He says, yes, but you're saying, the interviewer tells him, that the true Antichrist would play on that fear and say, you must come with me to avoid Skynet, to avoid Terminator, to avoid nuclear Armageddon. And Thiel says, yes. And my specific question for you, you're an investor in artificial intelligence, you're deeply involved in Palantir, military technology and war surveillance technology. And it seems to me that when you tell me a story about the Antichrist coming to power and using the fear of technological change to impose order on the world, I feel that this Antichrist might be using the tools that you're developing, obviously, right? I mean, wouldn't the Antichrist think, great, we're not going to have any more technological progress, but I really like what Palantir has done so far? Isn't that worrying? Wouldn't that be the irony of history, that the one who publicly worries about the Antichrist inadvertently accelerates his arrival? Obviously, the interviewer is saying to him, look, but if you're talking as if technology will be what plays against us, and you're the one developing it, let's see all this in a video so as not to make it so tedious. We're going to see several videos of Mr. Peter Thiel, so you keep him in mind, because we don't know if this one is the Antichrist or not, certainly, but he'll provide some entertainment. The first one is this one here.
He's the man behind Palantir, the most important artificial intelligence company in the world, which is dedicated to tracking migrants for Donald Trump's government. He's one of the creators of PayPal, along with Elon Musk, and one of the first investors in Facebook. A few weeks ago, in a talk at the French Academy, he spoke of the Antichrist. He believes he's coming, religious delusion, political performance, or something much more disturbing. By the end of the video, you'll understand why this speech matters more than it seems, and could be the most dangerous ideology of the moment.
I urge all of my fellow Americans to stand up and vote for Donald Trump.
Like so many other enthusiasts who, including here in the fifth column, said that Trump was the saviour. I remember it, and I'm gonna remember it 1,000 times over. Because while you realise the mistakes you've made over time, in the meantime, we human beings are heading towards extinction. The whole thing stinks. It really does. It really does. The owner of an OpenAI, of an artificial intelligence tech company, talking about the Antichrist. But wasn't that just something for a few crazy conspiracy theorists? Let's see, this one here.
As much as we wanted to finally know who the Antichrist was, Peter Thiel goes and leaves us hanging. In Rome, a stone's throw from the Vatican, this man set up a 3-day seminar called The Biblical Antichrist. But who is Peter Thiel, and why does he catch our attention? Well, Peter Thiel isn't just any guy. He's the founder of PayPal and, mind you, of the company Palantir, which is used by United States intelligence. Palantir, for instance, has identified targets for Israeli and American forces in Iran. Palantir was born after the Twin Towers attacks in September 2001, and based on a precise diagnosis, the intelligence agencies failed because they lacked the capacity to link news, interpret it, and make operational decisions.
And now it works for the CIA, precisely. It partly manages the CIA, you see. What a coincidence. By the way, those of you talking about Ranton plan and so on, don't worry. According to him, they're all about to be arrested. Or the white hats. And their bloody mothers, to put it mildly. This is incredible. This is Mr. Ranton plan. Do you know what I mean? I'm not even going to mention him. Who called us controlled dissidents because of the name we had. He somehow assures his followers, whoever they are, not to worry, because everyone in the deep state is being arrested secretly through the white hats.
Palantir, then, isn't just technique, it's a vision of power. This character, a friend of US Vice President J.D. Vance, believes that freedom is incompatible with democracy and that the world should be ruled by an elite of technology owners. Anyway, back to what we were saying, the Antichrist. Well, if he named him, we don't know, because the seminar participants signed a confidentiality agreement. So only they know what awaits us. The Vatican hasn't made, nor did it make, any mention. This is surely a story for Dan Brown.
But the Vatican isn't exactly an independent body. The Vatican is in direct collusion with these characters. Don't get lost now. Let's watch another video of this Peter Thiel, because I think he'll give us plenty to talk about.
Thiel was invited by the French Academy of Political Sciences to give a lecture. They invited him to speak about democracy. So when it's his turn to speak about democracy, he starts his speech. He starts by saying, "Hello everyone, thank you for welcoming me. Some of you know me from my public activity as a tech investor and entrepreneur. In my private life, I'm a moderate Orthodox Christian and a humble classical liberal with a seemingly minor deviation."
Humble? The man's a multi-billionaire.
"I'm very concerned about one matter." So then I imagine the audience said, "Let's see what concerns Peter Thiel so much. One of the most important people in the world today. What concerns me greatly," said Peter Thiel, "is the Antichrist. The idea that total destruction is coming and we're here to prevent it." That connects with
you, with artificial intelligence, are here to prevent it, right? How long have we been saying here at the fifth column that artificial intelligence is precisely them? What's behind artificial intelligence? At the very least, it's come to deceive us all, which is one of the hallmarks of the Antichrist. There comes a point, the current moment, when any physical evidence you might have is called into question, because now they can tell you that AI performs miracles. It can do everything. It even does your work for you, for those who use it, obviously.
It connects with Trump's speech, the last one he gave. When he presented the new defense policy, he said, "We're preventing the world from blowing to pieces and that we're..."
How can you say he's saving the world when Trump's doing exactly that, blowing it to pieces? And apparently they tell us that all the consequences we're going to experience, the energy restrictions, you having to turn off the lights to save fuel and so on, all that is a consequence of... They tell us the Strait of Hormuz and the one he started.
Saving humanity? From what? From the Antichrist. It's crazy, isn't it? I mean, they're all mad.
They're not mad. They're executing the plan they've been assigned to perfection, obviously. Let's watch one last video.
There's a strong internal conflict between the tech companies and the Vatican. The tech companies, led by Peter Thiel, co-founder of PayPal and Facebook, and the Vatican, obviously led today by Leo XIV. But this week, there was a rather bold gesture from Peter, which was to go and give press conferences in Rome at institutions around the Vatican, at 8 institutions. The title of the conference was The Antichrist. What Peter Thiel says is, the Antichrist is that they come to frighten people with the apocalypse, with the idea that there'll be a technology that will surpass them, that will take their jobs. So the way to dominate human beings is by talking about an apocalypse. The tech companies are starting to discuss theology, to discuss spirituality, because they talk about transhumanism, they talk about immortality, and the Vatican, well, is paying a bit of attention to everything that's being said, because they're also tech companies that have a lot of influence on geopolitics. I think they're getting into this, into the discussion.
They have significant influence on geopolitics. 4 lieutenant colonels from major tech companies have been appointed in the military sphere.
About spirituality, because there's going to be something of that. In the near future, there's going to be a discussion about humanity. I think these guys are trying to overcome finite life and build an immortality for the human being, and well, I think that they're...
Not immortality for the human being. The ones who want to make themselves immortal are them, by living in the bodies of human beings. This is the hybridization process in progress. Transhumanism is precisely the concept they've coined to cover up that procedure. Do we understand? We get it, don't we? This guy's more lost than... The latest video by this Peter Thiel guy, this one here.
He warns the world about the arrival of the Antichrist. What he has to say could forever change how you view the government. I'm Marcus Marin, and this is Tempio News. We decode power from Washington, D.C. for independent minds. Do you think the Antichrist is a person? Thiel says no. It's a global control system, a totalitarian government using fear to regulate technology. It's a major twist. He claims the real danger is that
he uses fear to dominate technology, when in principle everyone thinks that technology will actually be at the Antichrist's disposal. You see?
It's not some runaway technology, a super powerful AI, or an atomic bomb, but rather a government forcibly holding back those very technologies through control and social surveillance.
So they're saying the one who comes to stop all that is the Antichrist.
In fact, the Bible itself says in the book of Thessalonians that the Antichrist comes preaching peace and safety.
I have brought peace, freedom, justice, and security to my new empire. Your new empire?
When tech billionaire Peter Thiel speaks, it's worth listening. He backed Facebook early on. He supported Donald Trump when it was politically incorrect in Silicon Valley, and mentored Vice President J.D. Vance long before his rise. And right now he's giving talks claiming that climate activist Greta Thunberg embodies the archetype of the Antichrist. And he's not a joke. To him, she's someone using the fear of catastrophe to justify controlling technological development. But here's the paradox. A company Thiel founded, Palantir, literally builds surveillance technology for governments. Right now, it has a multi-million-dollar contract with ICE. So is he really protecting technological development with apocalyptic language, or does he just not want his companies regulated? The man who founded PayPal and funded SpaceX is now warning of a totalitarian tyranny based on the Bible. His warnings about the Antichrist might sound like science fiction, but his track record of correctly predicting tech and political shifts should give us pause.
Of course, if he's in control.
Remember that he now has direct influence in the White House. So do you think Peter Thiel is fighting against the Antichrist? Is he part of his arrival? Or is all this just nonsense?
What do you all think? That he's part of his arrival, or that he's fighting against him? What do you believe? Obviously, in his position, we've said time and again that no one gets to where he is in the world of the beast without the beast's consent. The beast is the Antichrist. So, well, this is the last video. We're going to cover 3 or 4 news items that are a bit outside the context we were looking at, but it never hurts. For example, this one here. It says, a clinical trial tests a nasal spray to reverse signs of brain aging. Well, you can imagine the news. This is an implant directly into the neurons. We already said it back in 2021 that the access route via the olfactory nerve, well, it has direct access to the brain of direct nanoparticles. The method based on extracellular vesicles offers a non-invasive alternative for tackling neurodegenerative disorders. And quite the opposite. Precisely what you're going to have here is a process of brain aging and neurodegeneration. It's exactly the opposite. It's twisted, inverted, and backwards. The empire of the beast. Another news item that catches my eye, it says the first pocket defibrillator arrives in Europe for instant action in the event of a cardiac arrest. And they sell all this to you as if it were huge news, good news, as if everyone, like seals, were clapping along. Listen, the news shouldn't be this, nor how to do workshops or courses in cardiopulmonary resuscitation. The news should be what is happening for a 4-year-old child to have 8 cardiorespiratory arrests. We know, but since they're not going to delve into or investigate that, this is a total disgrace, and as Esther Pario says later, I agree with him more and more. It's a disgusting world. It's sickening to live in this world and have to read those headlines from sellouts precisely for the based. To keep themselves in power somehow, kept there, they need to do this. Another news item, so you can see how the world of the beast works, is the following. I'm not talking about the moon landing, because obviously there hasn't been any moon landing as such. It says, NASA points out that astronauts have changed the climate of the moon. In other words, climate change even reaches as far as the moon. Here, indirectly, some might think, yeah, right, those are a more principled will say, look, it's already taking for granted that man has reached the moon for the second time, they say. Not even the first, but anyway, for the second time. And what they won't give credibility to is the second paragraph, that they've changed the climate, but they're already selling and taking for granted that we've reached the moon. You see? And the very final piece of news that we shall be sharing with you all today is this particular story right here. Russia, or Putin, threatens to launch attacks against Spain for manufacturing drones for the war in Ukraine. The Russian Foreign Ministry published a list of European companies that could be attacked for manufacturing drones, including one located in Madrid. And some will say, well, what's it got to do with us? Is Putin going to bum us now because of the price of oil at the time and all the crap they've put us through? Do you see how we human beings are just being passive here, whilst they pull your strings like puppies? In the next fifth column live stream, we're going to take or try to take some action, probably this weekend, where once we're aware of the likely scenario, we don't just have to be mentally prepared, but also look at what kind of actions, individually or in small groups and collectives, we can take to mitigate to some extent all the impositions they're going to force on us, that they're going to make us live through. Get a mental picture of what they're going to put us through. Yet again, once more, we must leave behind those early frustrating headaches, that sense of helplessness at being unable to achieve quite as much as we would truly like. But ultimately, anything within our reach that we can develop is more than welcome. We'll leave it there, wishing you a good weekend despite all this. But I'll tell you now, that over the coming days, even now, all the news will accelerate this ongoing process of apparent energy restrictions that will escalate over time, depending somewhat on the responses we might have, the actions we can take, and based on all that, they'll trample more or less on the heads of human beings. I'll leave you here, wishing you a good day or a happy weekend. Good night to you all.
Empower Translations. Translations for all humanity.